Attention everyone, the Japanese have directly pulled out of the entire photoresist business in China. Is this move a trap or a push for us to rise? Either way, it's something we can't bear in the short term. 90% of the photoresist we use is imported, with 60% coming from 4 Japanese companies. Without them, we can't operate in the high-end sectors. With Japan's withdrawal of supplies, domestic semiconductor factories are in chaos. Production capacity is declining and yield rates are crashing. Once production lines stop, they lose millions of yuan a day. The impact is most severe on the lines currently in production, and even ongoing projects may face delays in delivery. The entire semiconductor industry is suffering massive losses. A blogger in one video pointed out that few people know that in China's semiconductor industry, the true bottleneck isn't the photolithography machine, but a small bottle of liquid costing 50,000 RMB photoresist. On November 7, Japanese Prime Minister Sanae Takachi's comments regarding the topic that a Taiwan contingency is a Japan contingency struck a nerve with the Chinese government, provoking a furious retaliation from the CCP authorities. Measures ranged from blocking Chinese citizens' travel to Japan, halting seafood imports, to conducting military exercises. A Taiwanese politician even sarcastically remarked, seeing how the CCP is reacting to Japan, one might almost think that Communist China is trying to force Japan to acknowledge that Japan is a part of China. However, Japan did not engage in loud rhetoric or rude remarks. Instead, it quietly and decisively retaliated. According to a report by Chinese media outlet East Money, Japan's Ministry of Economy, Trade, and Industry may have escalated export controls on November 20th to 21st, adding 12 types of core semiconductor materials and related services to its end-user list, placing about 110 semiconductor-related entities from mainland China under heightened scrutiny. Among the most notable measures are those affecting photoresist and photolithography machine after-sales services. Regarding photoresist, 4 Japanese companies, JSR, Shin-Etsu Chemical, Tokyo Oka Kogoi, and Fujifilm, have suspended deliveries of ARF immersion and EUV photoresist to mainland Chinese customers, while high-end KRF products have been significantly delayed. Mainland China is more than 60% reliant on imports for photoresist, with ARF EUV almost entirely dependent on Japan and the Netherlands. Regarding photolithography machine after-sales services, Canon and Nikon have informed their Chinese customers that starting in November, the supply of certain DUV photolithography machine parts and on-site maintenance services will depend on export licensing conditions. Currently, China has over 1,200 DUV photolithography machines, 90% of which depend on Canon and Nikon for after-sales service. Japan has been tightening restrictions on semiconductor equipment exports to China in recent years. After Canon and Nikon further restrict services, China's stock of spare parts for photolithography machines will only last about 3 to 6 months, with photoresist being one of the most critical components. Industry insiders say this means that many Japanese-made photolithography machines currently in operation will face a supply shortage in the short term and could become scrap metal in the long term. Japan's control tactics have also shifted from explicit bans to technical upgrades. Unlike the open ban on 23 types of equipment in 2023, Japan is now adopting a gray customs clearance strategy, where rather than announcing an outright embargo, it is using case-by-case approvals, indefinite delays in issuing licenses, and cutting off parts and technical support, effectively a supply cutoff. Analysts have praised Japan's current approach, seeing it as the best strategy for dealing with an uncooperative government returning its tactics in kind. According to Bloomberg, the U.S. House of Representatives Select Committee on the CCP had previously warned Japan that if it failed to implement export bans on critical equipment needed for semiconductor manufacturing, such as photoresist, the U.S. would take further action, potentially imposing sanctions on Japanese companies involved. Industry insiders believe this is a strong endorsement from the U.S. for Japan's semiconductor export restrictions to China. The U.S. sees this not as a negative impact on Japan's economy, but as an opportunity arising from the shift in the global semiconductor market. Photoresist is to photolithography machines as ink cartridges are to printers, a key component and an essential consumable in semiconductor manufacturing. It is primarily used in the photolithography process to precisely transfer chip design patterns onto silicon wafers through a photochemical reaction. This process requires extreme precision, and even the slightest deviation can significantly affect the chip's performance or even render it unusable. So the quality and technology of photoresist are directly related to the final performance and yield of the chip. Given the importance of photoresist, why has China struggled to produce it domestically? Why are the videos on mainland social media claiming breakthroughs in photoresist development untrustworthy? An expert recently posted a video to explain. Currently, the global photoresist market is essentially dominated by Japan and the US. You might ask, isn't it just glue? With China's strong chemical industry, why can't they produce it? The reality is, photoresist is far more complex than it seems. It's difficult for three main reasons. First, the shelf life of high-end photoresist is extremely short, often only 6 months or even less. This means it's impossible to stockpile, and if supply is cut off, production lines will immediately shut down. Second, the extreme purity requirements. The formula for photoresist contains dozens of chemical substances, with each proportion error not exceeding 1 millionth. The metal impurity limit is as low as 0.001 parts per million, like 1 microgram per kilogram. To put this into perspective, imagine 8 Olympic swimming pools full of water. If even a single drop of impurity is mixed in, it must be identified and removed. This isn't just a challenge in terms of the formula, it's a critical test for the entire chemical purification, filtration, transport, and storage process. Third, the ecological barrier. Why are Japanese companies so dominant in the photoresist market? Because over the past 30 years, they have developed their expertise alongside semiconductor giants like TSMC, Intel, and Samsung. Producing photoresist isn't enough. It must be tested on photolithography machines worth billions of dollars. The verification cycle takes 2 to 5 years, with a high failure rate. Without top semiconductor foundries to conduct these trial and error processes, your photoresist will never make it out of the laboratory. Japan's dominance in the photoresist market dates back to the 1970s when the country's economy surged. The government and businesses jointly invested heavily in the semiconductor industry, focusing partially on materials. Companies like JSR, Tokyo Oka Kaigoi, and Shin-Etsu Chemical began researching the basic chemical formulations early on, gradually accumulating experience. By the 1980s, Japan's semiconductor production accounted for more than half of the global market, and the demand for photoresist soared. In the 1990s, Japan shifted to more advanced ARF-type photoresists, accumulating a vast number of patents. In the 2000s, EUV photoresist became the focus, with Japanese companies investing heavily and leading the technology by at least 10 years. By 2023, the global photoresist market was valued at approximately $5 billion US, with Japanese companies controlling 70% to 90% of the market share, and over 90% in high-end sectors. Projections for 2025 show a 7% growth, with Japan maintaining its dominant position. Why can't other countries replicate Japan's success? In addition to the high technical barriers and lengthy R&D cycles, which take years and require immense investment, Japan holds an overwhelming patent monopoly, 70% of related patents globally. It's virtually impossible to bypass this barrier. Major global chemical companies like the US's DuPont and Germany's BASF have less than 10% of the photoresist market share. South Korea has tried, but still depends on imports for high-end products. Japanese companies are not only technologically advanced, but their strong industrial chain cooperation in photolithography machines and silicon wafer production makes it nearly impossible for external competitors to enter. According to a 2024 Nikkei survey, Japan holds the #1 market share in 3 out of 5 semiconductor material categories, with photoresist being one of them. In short, Japan's monopoly in this field is the result of decades of deep industrial involvement, and other countries can't upset it in the short term. Japan's monopoly on photoresist technology has become a supply chain security guarantee for the Western world, but it spells bad news for communist China. An insider revealed that despite the CCP's public defiance, China is utterly dependent on Japan in ways it doesn't fully realize. If Japan were to really take action, China's economy could likely collapse within 2 weeks. This would be more severe and direct than any sanctions from the US. According to this insider, China has many companies attempting to produce photoresist. Over a decade ago, they tried to break through the high-end photoresist technology. The insider is familiar with one company that even recruited people from US and Japanese R&D departments, but the problem still couldn't be solved. There are domestically produced photoresists, but they are low-end products. They can work for displays and simple electronics, but once it comes to advanced processes, issues start popping up, such as unstable formulas, inadequate purity, excessive impurities, and insufficient light resistance. Even if they manage to produce a batch, it still can't fit photolithography machines. When tested at semiconductor factories, the yield rate crashes. Some people describe domestic photoresists as usable, but only for practice. This issue involves a country's mastery and accumulation of basic materials and processes, which cannot be solved simply by hiring people to steal technology. As previously mentioned in the video, even a single screw cannot make a machine work properly without support from the original Japanese manufacturer. The insider stated that under the leadership of the CCP, China's so-called world factory is at best a manufacturing powerhouse. Foreign and domestic companies bring advanced equipment and processes into China, consuming China's young lives, natural resources, and polluting the environment to provide the world with inexpensive, quality products, while the profits are siphoned off by top CCP elites and their allies, with no connection to being a true manufacturing power. He claims that the root cause is the flawed understanding of the leadership, including Xi Jinping. A few years ago, a video from Japan's Takeda Kangata Seisakacho manufacturing company showcasing seamless metal molds left Chinese people astonished. They were forced to acknowledge that Japan's precision manufacturing processes are beyond the reach of China. One Chinese person commented on a video, "Here is the Chinese character for longevity, and we can see it being slowly squeezed out and then pressed back in without any visible cutting marks. These metal blocks are all finished products from Takeda, who have been challenging the infinite possibilities of metal processing since their founding. After watching this, aren't you amazed by Japan's powerful precision metalworking technology? Against the backdrop of current tensions in Japan-China relations, industry insiders from China have identified 11 key technological sectors where China is heavily reliant on Japan." He explained first are the semiconductors. The photoresist market is the hardest hit. Topping the list is the 12-inch silicon wafers. Japanese company Shin-Etsu Chemical and Simco dominate the global market, with more than 70% of the 12-inch silicon wafer market in mainland China controlled by Japan. Although Shanghai Shinseng has achieved massive production, it still cannot meet the demand for high-end products needed for processes under 14 nanometers. Electronic specialty gases. Japan controls around 30% of the global market share, and China still relies on imports for high-end mixed gases and isotope gases. High-purity hydrogen fluoride. Japanese companies dominate over 80% of the global market. While domestic products can meet most mature process requirements, they still fall short in producing ultra-high purity products at the 1 ppt level, with issues in stability and consistency. Packaging substrates. Japanese companies like Shinko Electric led the high-end flip-chip ball grid array substrate market. Looking at key equipment and components. Sixth is semiconductor testing equipment. Lasertec is the world's only supplier of EUV photoresist testing equipment. Japanese companies like Tokyo Electron and Hitachi High-Tech dominate the electric process and defect detection market, while Chinese companies like Jingce Electronics are making progress. EUV testing remains an unsolved gap. 7 is OLED emissive materials. Japanese companies like Idemitsu Kosan and Sumitomo Chemical hold core patents, with a global market share of 30% to 40%. 8th is ceramic capacitors. Maharata Manufacturing holds 31% of the global market, with Japanese companies controlling 50% and dominating the high-end automotive-grade ultra-miniature market. 9th are filters. Murata leads the surface acoustic wave filter market, co-dominating the market with US companies. 10th is precision reduction gears. Nabatsuko monopolizes 70% of the RV reducer market, while Harmonic dominates 80% of the harmonic reducer market. 11 is digital cameras. Japanese brands dominate over 90% of the global interchangeable lens camera market, maintaining a stronghold in the professional photography sector despite the decline in the consumer market. The recent Japan-China conflict originated from Japanese Prime Minister's clear stance against the CCP's military threats towards Taiwan. This was followed by threatening remarks from China's Consul General in Osaka, Xue Jian, which led to widespread calls in Japan for his expulsion. On November 18, Director General of the Asian and Oceanian Affairs Bureau, Kani Masaki, reiterated Japan's position during a meeting in Beijing with Liu Jingsong, the Director General of the CCP's Department of Asian Affairs. This was supposed to be a private meeting, with no media engagement beforehand, but after the talks, the Chinese government notified media reporters and allowed them to enter the Ministry of Foreign Affairs for a photo opportunity. Liu's awkward performance in front of the media, with his hands in his pockets and a dismissive gesture, was widely criticized. In contrast, the Japanese representative bowed slightly, and this image was widely circulated by Chinese state media. In response, Japanese independent parliamentarian Jin Matsubara wrote that such rude behavior reflected the barbarism of Communist China. He criticized the CCP for its dismissive attitude towards the human rights of its neighboring Japanese citizens, which further fueled disgust toward Beijing's authoritarianism. Japanese politician and member of the Japan Innovative Party, Sekihei, described Liu as a thuggish diplomat from a gangster state. Masaharu Okashi, the head of the Nike Americas Bureau, analyzed on X that Liu's rudeness was a carefully calculated display. He stated that such a posture would not have been acceptable even within China, explaining that while it might seem cliché, it holds significant importance for CCP domestic propaganda. A Japanese reporter at the scene revealed that Kanimasaki, the Japanese representative, lowered his head only to listen to the interpreter. Japanese Chief Cabinet Secretary Manaru Kihara emphasized that the Chinese media's arrangement had not been coordinated with Japan beforehand. The Chinese government's behavior ultimately provoked Japan's silent but precise counterattack. In this Japanese-China confrontation, overseas Chinese people overwhelmingly supported Japan. One commenter noted that the best and quickest way to offend the CCP is by telling the truth. Mainland Chinese people, unable to directly criticize the CCP, sarcastically commented in their unique way by swapping China with Japan. Japan keeps bragging online, but it's really just for the ignorant masses back home. Japan only cares about the emperor's rule. Everything else is nonsense. Japan knows that only through propaganda wars and threatening its neighbors can it divert domestic conflicts and unite the people against the outside world. The most laughable thing is that no matter which thug gets beaten up, they immediately fear they might be next. Analysts suggest that Japan's restrictions on photoresist exports to China is a decisive move, showcasing Japan's confidence in this area. If, as CCP propaganda claims, this tactic forces China's industries to break through, Japan would never use such a measure. However, Japan is unlikely to immediately impose a full ban on photoresist exports to China. Japan's diplomacy is rational and has to consider various factors, including strategic coordination with the US. Nevertheless, if the Chinese government continues its stubborn course, this supply war will officially begin. The next domino to fall may be the complete closure of EUV photoresist exports to China by 2026, which could result in a rapid collapse of China's high-tech industries.